give them a curriculum whereby they have to utilize Mandarin in the course of their studies. This is how, by using, will we pick up the skills that are necessary for conversation as well as the skills needed to speak and write proficiently. Also, we have to realize that English is a common language. That's why utilizing Mandarin or other specific languages such as Malay may actually lead to communication barriers. So we will suggest that, of course, we should work on bilingualism throughout all the different races, but the focus in this case, especially in terms of the official language, will still be English. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kushen. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, sir, briefly in Malay. Saudara-saudari sekalian, saya boleh cakap sikit-sikit Melayu, tetapi saya
Please carry on, Prime Minister.
Tetapi saya nak cakap lagi bagus Melayu. Kelab masyarakat saya in Cashew mesti mempunyai pelajaran bahasa Melayu. My community centre in Cashew constituency, even though I'm in Teck Ghee, is going to implement a course in Bahasa Melayu, and I hope the response will be great. Briefly in Mandarin, 我非常感谢你利用华语来讲解。虽然我的华语不比你流利，但是我会尽量。我们去喝茶之前，我们有了一个很严肃的讨论。那个讨论关于到我们在新加坡种族和谐的评论，而且我认为我应该以总理的身份来讲解。Sir, in English. Now, before we went for the recess, I think we spoke at length about the racial situation in Singapore, and personally, I am very encouraged by the responses gathered by the members of this House. Because to me, it actually shows that we hold very dearly to our hearts the issue and the principle of multiculturalism in a very multicultural and a very diverse Singapore. Now, let me address why I think we have to manage society in terms of race. As you all would know, Singapore is a colonial construct. Before that, we are nothing, and the British came, the races came from various parts of the world, and that is why we are here today. Now, why it is important that we manage it accordingly. We cannot simply wish for racial identities to disappear straight away, or that we do not manage our society this way. It will not disappear overnight. It is in fact actually going to be staying here for the foreseeable future, and I think for a long time to come. Why? To our north, we have Malaysia. To our south and surrounding us, we have Indonesia. Racial identity and consciousness is very, very real. So let me impress upon you the seriousness of this fact. Okay, now let me talk a bit about the various self-help groups that are classified by their racial community. CINDA, CDAC, the Eurasian Association, Mendaki, and so on and so forth. They are part of the Many Helping Hands approach. And in between, during the recess, I have a member of the opposition coming up to clarify with me, as well as a member of my own cabinet, clarifying with me that MUIS is actually a body that is an authority on Islamic issues pertaining to Islamic teaching that concerns the Muslims in Singapore. It is not the chief coordinator for social welfares. It is actually the coordinator and authority for socio-cultural issues within the Muslim domain. So having said that, why I insist, or why the government believes that self-help groups should remain in Singapore, because self-help groups are actually well suited to manage the sensitivities of each self-help group, of each racial community in Singapore. This is something that the government will not be able to adequately manage, and therefore the government needs to rely on these self-help groups to manage the community better and preserve social harmony and racial harmony. as I mentioned, self-help groups are part of a many helping hands approach. So as a secular government, we deem it to be in the interest of Singapore to maintain the status quo. Now, the opposition has made the case for centralized disbursement of funds with regard when it deals with self-help groups. Why I say that we cannot do this is because if we, the government, were to consolidate the disbursing authority onto MCYS, it would mean that MCYS will have to take on the responsibilities of SINDA, CDAC, Mendaki, and the Eurasian Association. The administrative burden would increase exponentially, and therefore it is for this practical reason that it is not advisable for the government to adopt this move. Rather, the government believes that it will be better for the disbursement of funds to be left to the self-help groups. But during the recess, the shadow minister for MCYS did tell me the issue is why some communities may get more than others. Now let me address this, and I will speak the truth. Some communities do need more help than others. So the burning question is actually, how does the government resolve the conflict in terms of having to distribute the funds in a way that does not prejudice, nor bias, nor disadvantage any of the communities in Singapore? This is a very difficult decision that the government has to undertake on a daily basis, and I can assure you it is not an easy business to do. In considering the disbursement of funds to the various self-help groups, the government will have to consider whether or not it is fair and properly justified. As far as the government budget is concerned, what matters is the judicious decision-making on part of the government, and that we are all fair to the various communities that need help. So when you say that some groups have been receiving X million dollars more than these groups, in absolute terms it may be more because of sheer relative size. But I ask you to also look at the relative percentage when it comes to judging the increase over year, or whether or not in making the judgment that the government has been helping these communities to the best of its ability. So I ask you to look at the percentage. Let me just raise a hypothetical example. If, for instance, you increase funding to Mendaki, and then in this fiscal year it is, for example, 10 million. In the next year, it is 12 million. That is about a 20% increase. So I urge you to look at it in terms of percentages rather than the actual value itself, because it will make more sense and it will help you to see the government's perspective in disbursement of aid. As I've mentioned, the administrative burden would be too immense on MCYS to handle the disbursement of aid from a centralized perspective. So let me reiterate once more that the government decides funding to self-help groups based on a very sound and rational decision-making process, regardless of the size of the community, but based on which community needs more assistance the most. So the government has to be very judicious in this, and I thank the Speaker for giving me the time to address this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Mr. Eric Tay. Mr. Marcus Kong. Please remember that we are not discussing the issue of education within the supply bill.
Yeah, because I'd like to seek the Prime Minister for some clarifications. I think basically the opposition here, we are not here to say that we are abolishing the self-help group scheme. I think we recognize the self-help group are there to actually improve the community by themselves. So be it for Mendaki is there to actually improve the Malay, who generally, if you take the O-levels and PSLE results, you know that they are generally doing lower than the Chinese, so that they are there, Mendaki is there to be in place to actually move the Malay community to be on par with the Chinese community. Okay? And why is the opposition actually asking MCYS to administer the disinvestment of funds to each individual applicants or person in need of bursary? Is because MCYS currently controls the Comcare Fund. So by controlling the Comcare Fund, they should have a list of people who are needy, so that it's better for them to identify people who are needy and disinvest the funds to them directly. So saving the administrative costs. I think that is, everyone on the opposition side, we are actually proposing that. Thank you.
Prime Minister, you may address the clarification, the point of clarification.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I think this should be the last point of clarification and we should get on to the main business of
Yes, that's right.
Now, I think you have mentioned a very valid point in that citing the ComCare as the main administrative reason as to why MCYS should be the distributor of funds to the self-help groups. Am I right? But I have mentioned in my address earlier on that as a secular government, the MCYS as a government ministry is not well placed to manage the sensitivities of these various communities, and the trade-off is that, you know, the government does not want to actually be caught in a very difficult situation to have offended somebody. I'm not saying that it should happen, but in the event that it does happen, it will be why this has happened is because the centralization is there. So what I'm advocating and what my government is advocating is actually let the self-help groups remain as they are because they know the community better than the government does. And it is the government who relies on them to provide accurate information on the performance of each community. And that is why the self-help group should stay. I hope that answers your query.
Are there any members wishing to speak? Mr. Zhuang Ejin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, in its reading of the supply bill, the finance minister introduced the scheme to hire more allied educators, saying that teachers will no longer have to photocopy papers or fill in forms. Now, I'm quite appalled at that statement, which suggests that the minister has no idea of the job scope of allied educators. So first and foremost, I would like to beseech the Minister of Education to explain to the House the specific job scopes of allied educators. Secondly, the very frivolous suggestion that allied educators are there to do the menial jobs for teachers is one of the avenues where allied educators are basically looked down upon in our education system. As an educator, I'm extremely appalled by that kind of statement. So, what I would like to also ask the Minister for Education is this. Can you explain to us what exactly is a career progression for allied educators to show that they have a role in our education system? More importantly, can you provide the House with the number of allied educators who have actually resigned in the last 2 years? Anecdotal evidence suggests there has been a fairly significant number. More importantly, the reason why they resign is because of the lack of career progression. So why exactly are we hiring people that we don't know what exactly they're supposed to do? Why is the ministry proposing something they do not understand?
The Minister of Education would like to address his point.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Opposition MP, for your question. Actually, the allied educators, what they are doing a supplementary role to the current teachers. They are not solely there, of course, to just photocopy paper and to do all that. But of course, they are in charge of the administrative staff, so that they aid the teachers in doing so. Okay, and they are not the office workers, but they are people who provide emotional as well as psychological support for the students and the teachers, and aid them in coming up with the policies as well as the class, how the classes are supposed to be planned. So they provide a supporting role to this. And why we suggest that allied educators are utilized is because the teachers' primary role is to teach and but what the allied educators is, because we are introducing a more holistic scheme, we want the teacher to understand each and every student, the necessities that they need, the problems that they face, and the specific help that they need for certain subjects. So these allied educators can actually aid a helping hand to understand them, as well as provide emotional support for if they have financial background. And I also would like to assert that for the self-help groups, MOE actually works as the intermediary, whereby teachers will actually direct these students to the respective self-help groups. So the allied educators can actually understand the problems if they have any financial issues, and then direct them specifically to the respective groups to allow efficient and effective allocation. Sorry, is there any question? I hope that answers your question.
I will rule that out of order. If there is a need to raise another question, I will do so at the next available opportunity because I would like to open the house up to more questions. Any other member wishing to speak?